Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As Catherine said, I have been at utilities for about 8 years now, and before that, I was a contractor. I was a contractor for about 15 years throughout Colorado, and I've seen a lot of different sites. And over those years, plus my years at utilities, I have started to formulate some ideas and some concepts around creating more drought resilient or resistant landscape. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I really want to show you a lot of pictures, a lot of options, talk about some cool plants that would do great for you if you're interested in this kind of landscape, and really just show you some solutions that will help your landscape become more resilient. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. To begin, we are going to talk about Colorado Springs. You know, what's the climate that we have here locally? Why is it so important that we adopt these concepts of drought resistance? We're going to look at the options, and when we come to options, I always start with this idea of watering requirements, especially when you're trying to go low water or very low water. So we'll divide the landscapes up into those two categories, and we'll look at some pictures and talk about the differences of those areas. Then we'll look at some additional benefits. If you choose this type of landscaping, what other types of things are you going to be contributing to your yard? And lastly, we'll talk about additional resources. In the Colorado Springs area, it's typical for us to get around 16 inches of precipitation a year. So last year, I think we only had 10 for the entire year, which is crazy. And so that amount of precipitation can swing wildly. Now, about 11 inches of that typically falls during the growing season, so kind of your April through October time frame. And when you compare that to what a lot of us consider traditional landscaping, which has Kentucky bluegrass as kind of its base, Kentucky bluegrass requires 40 inches of precipitation, and that means that we're going to be applying somewhere between 24 and 30 inches of irrigation a year on those areas. So we really want to adopt something that's going to work better for us. Most of our water comes to us as actually high mountain snow, so it comes down as snow melt. And most of our water here in Colorado Springs we import. We bring over from the Colorado River. It's about 60 to 70% that we bring into town. 25% comes locally from the Pikes Peak and Arkansas River Basin, which is where we're located. And in general, these surface water supplies are renewable, meaning they come back year after year, but they're highly variable. That variability really makes us have to create a resilient and robust water system. So this is just kind of a view of our water system. We bring water in all the way over from the Blue River and Eagle River. Some of our farthest water supplies is Homestake Reservoir, which is north of Leadville, about an hour. And we bring all this water to us through these large pipelines. Drought is a natural part of our climate, as we talked about that swinging and how much precipitation we get. Drought is something we experience. We live in a semi-arid environment. And we manage this crazy system to help lessen the impact. So in years where we're having drought, we actually bring water closer to us to some of our local reservoirs. We will move water around so we can capture more water in different areas. So we try to lessen the impact just by managing this robust system. But ultimately, we plan for and expect to be in restrictions 1 out of 10 years. And we'd adopted some new rules last year, which are the WaterWise rules, and these will really help us mitigate water waste and will ultimately help us preserve the water in our storage. So all of these things we do to lessen the impact of drought, but there's one more thing that we can do as homeowners within this area, and that actually is we could create landscapes that are more drought resistant or resilient. So this picture here is actually a picture of Scout Winters, one of our coworkers' front yard, and that grass, believe it or not, is not Kentucky bluegrass. That is actually Sundancer buffalo. And that only receives irrigation once a week, which is about 60% less than the irrigation for bluegrass. So as little as 9 inches a year of irrigation, you can have a great looking lawn. You can create a landscape that's more resilient by just changing what plant choices or changing the plants that you have in your landscape. So this concept that we're going to talk about today is more of a naturalistic or xeric approach. When we talk about water-wise landscaping, there's kind of two buckets you can fall into. You can fall into the bucket that's I want a very traditional landscape. I need Kentucky bluegrass because I have kids and pets, but I want to use water wisely. And that we consider the 7 principles. So we actually have a class which I believe is Water-Wise Landscape Design using the 7 principles. And that class is on our website. But that is all about how do you take your existing site and manipulate it to make the plants you are installing more water resilient. This idea tonight, making a more drought resistant landscape, this is more of a naturalistic approach. We're going to take our site and we're going to find plants that are appropriate for it. We're not going to try to change our site a whole lot. We're not going to manipulate it to make it better for our plants. We're going to pick plants that like where we live. So we're going to use very xeric or native or well-adapted plants. We're going to see landscapes that have native grass or no grass. We're going to see landscapes that have grass that's not mowed. We're going to talk about water. We're going to talk about watering it somewhere between once per month and once per week. And ultimately, we want these plants and these landscapes to be resilient to drought. So at times when we are in drought restrictions, guess what? Your landscape is going to thrive. It's not going to be impacted by potential water curtailments or restrictions on number of watering days. Your landscape is not going to have a problem with that. It's going to do great in those years when we expect to have drought. So let's talk about resilient landscape options. The first place I like to begin when looking at this category is water requirements. And when it comes to water requirements, normally we talk to customers about there's kind of 4 levels. There's high water, which is basically your Kentucky bluegrass. You have your moderate water, which is kind of a lot of traditional plants, your spireas, Carl Forster I would put in that category. Then you have low water, which is watering once a week, and this saves you about 60% of the water that you're going to use when you compare it to that high water. And there's very low water, which is 1 to 2 times per month. So in that category, you really are striving for native, extremely well-adapted plants that are going to thrive in our local condition. So in this picture, I just want to call out a few plants. So this could thrive. Currently it's receiving water once a week. So this could definitely be a very low water option for you. In the back, it's kind of hard to see, but there's some undaunted muley grass, which is this beautiful green grass that has these pink plumes later in the year. You'll see that in some upcoming pictures. We have little Trudy catmint in the front, and then we have a beautiful allium bulb across the center. And this was 1 year. This landscape had been in 1 year when I took this picture. So you can have great looking, very low water landscapes that have a lot of color and interest and add beauty to your site without needing a lot of water. So when we look at very low water plant choices, again, they're native or well adapted. They're only going to require water 1 or 2 times a month. I will tell you that in my experience with these landscapes, you might lose some of these plants in really wet years. Because we have so much variety in the amount of water we can get or receive locally, this category you may lose some plants if they're too wet. If their roots or their crown are too wet, that's where I see a few of these plants start to die or lose their vigor. So it's the exact opposite problem you would have with more traditional landscapes when it's really hot and dry, which is more common than really wet these days. You would have a problem in those landscapes. This also just creates a very resilient landscape, so it's going to thrive and do great in the weather trends that we're currently seeing. So just to call out a few plants in this picture, we have Mexican feathergrass, which is that beautiful upright grass there right next to those rocks. We have Engelmann daisy right there, that's the yellow blooming one. And then we have baby blue rabbit brush. It's another plant you're gonna see that I love a lot and is extremely resilient in these pictures. So now we're gonna look at one of our lowest water areas at the garden. This is actually our cactus garden. And I like to show this because I think oftentimes people have this misconception that cactus gardens are prickly and harsh and kind of ugly and unkept. I feel like this garden is such a beautiful place. It's not that extremely harsh feeling environment. It actually has a lot of softness to it. And part of that is due to this undaunted muley grass. So this is the grass in its glory. This is the green grass I talked about in a previous picture. But here you can see these beautiful pink plumes that just cover this plant and make it amazing. And this is how it's growing on very low water. So this is literally once or twice a month. That's all the more water this grass is getting. And it's this beautiful 3-foot mound of just pink fluff. Amazing. This is again what it looks like in the springtime, and then you get those pink flowers. Next up, across the front, we have some prairie zinnia. This is a native ground cover you would find here. This is a plant where sometimes if we get a lot of excess drainage of water right next to the sidewalk, because the sidewalk sheds this way, we can get a little dieback right in front. So you gotta make sure not to keep the crown of this plant wet. But this prairie zinnia blooms a long time. It's a short ground cover, it spreads, and it has this beautiful golden yellow flower. In the back, we have a pencil cholla. And yes, this pencil cholla makes a statement. It's really strong and upright and skinny and kind of harsh and exactly what you think a cactus garden is going to be, but it's a beautiful focal point within this garden, and I love it. In the back, we softened it up with this windwalker salvia, which is actually a perennial. This thing dies back to the ground, and it grows about 3 to 3.5 feet tall and wide every year, and the hummingbirds absolutely love it. So this is not a quote-unquote native plant, but it is an extremely well-adapted plant that is just performing amazingly in our garden. So that's a big win. Love that plant. Blooms a long time, and I can't believe it does this in as little as once or twice a month watering. Across the front, we have some apuncha. I'll show you some more pictures of those in bloom. Some of those guys, when they're blooming, they're the prettiest things in the gardens, let me tell you. This is a picture of that garden backlit, so you can see the pink fluff of that muley, the undaunted muley grass. You can see the pink blooms of that windwalker salvia just shine. And then over on the right, we have another cholla. I believe that's a snow leopard. And even though, again, you think of cactus as being really harsh and not very welcoming in a garden, but here it just glows with that early morning sunshine. And in the wintertime, this garden also has great beauty. It excels so much in the texture department. So just another picture from a different angle. This is it in spring. I'll show you the plants real quick. Windwalker salvia. This is about beginning of June, just to give you a time frame. Russian hawthorn, beautiful, extremely low water tree in the back. Here it is in bloom. It has white flowers. Before this picture was taken, and then late in the year those flowers turn to red berries and it gets a beautiful yellow fall color to it. Those red berries help feed our birds in the wintertime. They're actually not palatable to the birds until they freeze and thaw several times, so it's a great late winter food provider for native birds, which is awesome, or local birds. So over on the right, we have Blackfoot daisy, which is just a small perennial. Again, it's native to this region, and it's a great long blooming white short perennial, just wonderful. And it can do great on 1 to 2 times a month watering. So a wonderful option. In the front, we have more prairie zinnia, which is that yellow one I showed you earlier. And this is what it looks like in June. This is what it looks like in August. So what I love about this is it kind of changes the look and feeling of the space. You kind of go from where when these cacti are blooming, they're kind of the stars, they're the focals of this garden. And then when they're done doing their thing, everything else is filled out and blooming and just looks amazing. If you're not so fond of the prickly stuff, the cacti, there are other wonderful plants that would do great in your landscape. So this is a picture of part of the landscape over by our orange house in the Waterwise neighborhood in the back of our garden. And here we have some wonderful tall blue rabbit brush. It's a big gray plant in back. That blooms yellow in October. And again, the bees just love it. Right in front of that is Coronado Agastaki. Now, this is an Agastaki or hyssop. So this is a plant that I've seen do better in rock mulch than wood mulch. And Coronado is one that we picked for this one because of how closely it resembled the orange on the house. What can I say? I'm a designer. I'm a bit of a dork. I will say that the other one, the Agastaki rupestris or sunset hyssop, is more of a standby plant. This one we lost probably 30% of them within about 3 years, and now that we're about 5 years in, we've lost over half of them. So beautiful plant, but just as one you might have to replace a little bit more often than the rupestris or the sunset hyssop. Well, you'll see coming up actually. Right in front of that is some Blonde Ambition Blue Grama. This is a beautiful ornamental grass. It's one of my favorites, extremely low water. It has these beautiful seed heads that look like eyelashes, just wonderful. And then we have a golden sword yucca. And that golden sword yucca, kind of a similar thing to the Coronado Agastaki, is we had some that did great and they lasted a long time. And then we had some that did this, where this one actually died back to the ground, and those are the new shoots forming the next year. So when it comes to varieties of plants, it does make a difference. There's also some Rocky Mountain penstemon in this picture. It's kind of the short green stuff like right along the dry riverbed there. That is a native perennial. Spring blooming, it's usually blooming in May. And another top plant for pollinators, for native pollinators. So just beautiful plant. Here we have a border. So this is right in front of our xeriscape demonstration garden. This is right along the front of our garden. And here are some more great plants that would do wonderful in your front yard or even next to your patio and back. So this is the sunset hyssop, and this had just been planted the year before. So this one right where my pointer is kind of small, but you can see a larger one up and to the right in the picture. I don't know if you can see my pointer over here. And then we have some more of that Undaunted Muley. Again, I just loved it. It's such a great performer at a limited amount of water. It's truly amazing. In front of that, we have some Santa Fe Phlox, which is a pink blooming short ground cover, beautiful perennial. And then a good old standby is some little Trudy catmint, just a shorter, compact version that's not going to fall on you as much. There's a lot of great versions of catmint. One of my favorite is Walker's Low. But this one is about half of the size, if not a third of the size, and just really stays compact and blooms a long time. And then over to the left here, we have the baby blue rabbit brush. I will tell you the baby blue versus just the gray rabbit brush. One, this is much smaller. It's only going to be about a 3x3 plant, but two, it blooms earlier. It's going to bloom in August. So this is actually one of our volunteers' backyard, and here you can see she completely adopted this kind of xeric naturalistic look, and I think it's absolutely stunning. There are all sorts of penstemons in this picture. There's an agave right in the center. Agaves will grow in Colorado Springs, but you have to have a nice little pocket or warm microclimate with some rock that they need to be planted in or next to see them really grow well. There's also this yellow blooming plant off to the left. This is a moonshine yarrow. Great low water, well adapted perennial. But you can see you can really have a truly beautiful space that you want to spend time in when using these more native plants or well adapted plants and saving all of that water. So again, in times where we're in a drought, these plants are thriving. They don't need additional water. In fact, they probably like the additional heat we're having during that time period. This is another picture of a kind of border. This is actually at Denver Botanic Gardens. This is their water-wise or xeric landscape border. And I think it's just beautiful. We've talked about a lot of these plants. There's some penstemons. There's actually some mullins. Those are the yellow ones kind of up on the hillside. And then we have some Mexican feathergrass in front. But in a commercial setting, you could also choose to do these very low water landscapes and have it be a success. This is actually Kendrick Lake in Denver. This is one of their city parks. And they chose to come in and just show a very different style. Now this one does feel in my opinion, more southwest. You can see more rock. The plants are spaced farther apart. And in some ways that's good for the plants because there's less root competition for the water. I will say though that when you're talking about maintenance for some of these gardens, spacing your plants out may actually make some, well, they can attribute to more maintenance if you're getting a lot of weed seed germination. So covering the ground is a great practice to try to use, whether you're using wood mulch or rock mulch. You want about 70% of that ground plane covered. You can make it look more xeric and embrace this look. It does look nice, but it's just kind of what your style preference is. We have this wonderful plant database called waterwiseplants.org where you can actually filter by how much water use you want to use. So if you were in this site and you did water use very low, you could actually click the plant type up above and tell if you want trees, shrubs, or perennials. And then it gives you options. So over to the right are 6 options. These are some great, very low water tree options that you can use on your landscape. There's things like hackberry, which is actually a pretty fast growing, I would consider it a medium to large shade tree that has a beautiful yellow fall color and is extremely low and is very low water. So it's a wonderful plant for our area. Then we have the Russian hawthorn that I talked about earlier. There's also things like thornless honey locust, or there's other hawthorns available. And then 2 wonderful evergreens in the very low category would be pinyon pine and ponderosa. So these are just 6 that I chose, but you can find more in our website. There's also a ton of shrubs on there for this category. And when you click on the plants, it actually tells you all the information about them and our experience. Because this is our plant database, we tell you how we have seen them do for us locally. Again, just some wonderful options here. Apache plume is a great native that's really low water that has these wonderful white flowers that turn into these puff balls later in the year. So it just has a wonderful evolving texture to the plant. And then you can see one of my favorite, the baby blue rabbit bush down there in the bottom right. It's wonderful. Gotta try it. So let me look at perennials. Here's just a handful of perennials, most of which I've already talked about, or you've seen pictures of how they're incorporated in the landscape, but just wonderful plants. And by sorting by that water amount or requirement, you can really find plants that are going to suit your needs and give you that resilient landscape. So when we look at grass options for very low, normally in this category, I would tell you, you're probably looking at a native mix, something like this. So this is actually the backyard of Scott Winter's house, and he, as you can see, he backs right up to this open space, and he's on this steep slope. So he wanted this transition area that, 1, he didn't have to mow, and 2, didn't require a lot of water. And he just did this wonderful native mix. So you have the limited maintenance. You can save up to the 80% of the water because you are only watering once or twice a month. Has a wonderful natural look that if you are close to some of those areas, it's a great blend where you kind of just dissolve your property line and blend it right into that native space. And it's great for peripheral areas at HOAs. If you're an HOA that was built in the 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you probably have a lot of turf grass. And coming in with a native grass option that you leave tall, that you mow once or twice a year, is a great way to save water and have this beautiful look. Here's another view of the native grass section. This is actually Rocky Mountain penstemon blooming in there, so I just wanted to show you what that plant looked like in bloom. And a lot of that grass around there is blue grama with a few other things mixed in. So when it comes to low water plant choices, here we're really talking about adapted plants. So a lot of times these are commercially available plants that are easy to find and they require less water than most people think. So here we're talking about watering these plants once a week. And in this picture, we have things like peonies on the front. We have some creeping juniper right next to the bench. And we have some lamb's ears, some Russian sage, a lot of really common plants that people have in their landscape that most of the time they're overwatering. So you can still do some traditional plants or some feeling or looks to your landscape with less water. You can choose to go more naturalistic with it as well, or even Southwest. So you have options in this once a week range. You now have more plants available to choose from, and you have more style options to create. And this creates a very reliable landscape because in general, I find that these types of plants usually can accept a lot more water than once a week, but do great on once a week. So with landscapes, when I was a contractor, we watered our drip systems 2 or 3 times a week, depending on soil type. So if we have sandy soil, your sandy soil doesn't hold as much water, so you gotta water a little bit more regularly. While with clay soils, they hold more water, so you can spread out your waterings. But we were watering these types of plants 2 or 3 times a week when they really just needed it once. So I learned a lot when I started playing around with plants at utilities, and I saw how plants could respond with less water. But if they get more water from rainfall, you don't have as much of a chance for them to die or to have any problems with that additional moisture. And I would say all of these plants you're completely fine doing in wood mulch as well. So here we have some plants in this picture. We have Mexican feathergrass in the back. Now that's a plant you saw in very low. Well, guess what? At once a week watering, it does well too. In the front, we have some St. Mary's broom spruce, which is that little blue guy right there off to the left. When it comes to spruce, my preference is at least once a week. When you get to evergreens, you kind of have this scale. You've got these really, really drought resilient, take very low water, bristlecone pine, pinyon pine, ponderosas, and then you kind of move to the other end and you're required to have a little bit more water. And a lot of times I tell people, think about where you see these trees in nature. You see ponderosas, pinyons on a lot of south-facing slopes. So they're pretty hot, pretty dry. And then you tend to see more of kind of your spruce on the north-facing slope where it's a little bit more wet. So that's just what you want to recreate in your landscape. So here, yes, spruces are native, but they do better if you can water them a little bit more, especially if you have them in a full sun condition. Then we have Table Mountain Ice Plant across the front. Now that will grow in wood mulch, but I do see that one perform better in small gravel. It just tends to really thrive and grow more vigorously for you, but it's a great adapted ground cover. And I'll get to the grass in just a second. Over to the right, we have Pikes Peak penstemon. So this is a different variety of penstemon. This one's a little bit bushier. It has foliage that goes up the flower stems, where the Rocky Mountain really just has a lot of foliage at the bottom. And then when the flower stems disappear, you cut them all the way back to that lower foliage. This one is just a nice bushy form. And then we have variegated iris. It's one of my favorite landscape plants. It has this beautiful purple bloom and it smells like grape juice. Now the grass here is prestige buffalo grass. So when it comes to low water and lawns, I'm really going to talk about 2 options, buffalo and blue grama. And I'm not going to get super in depth because Catherine has another class where she talked about both of those grasses and kind of what you need to know about them in more detail. But I did want to show you a progression of the buffalo grass. Now, granted, we planted these in 2014, and 2014 and 15 were a little bit cooler and wetter. So we planted this as a plug, and you can see they're about 6 inches on center, and we planted this little area. And by August, because it was a cooler and wetter year, it didn't grow a whole lot. But by that next summer, even though, remember I told you earlier, May of 2015, we actually had 20 inches of water parts in the spring. Even with that, you can see it grew into this beautiful lawn. And then here we are in October of 16, and it was just fabulous. I love this grass area. You can choose not to mow buffalo grass. You can choose to mow it once a month if you'd like. It's just a fantastic grass option if you're not constantly on the lawn. So if it's a low traffic area, it's a really good choice. And here's just a close-up of that grass. So just an awesome, awesome choice. Now, I wanted to show you this whole landscaped area from kind of early spring to fall. And I did want to point out one thing. In the lower left-hand corner of the picture, you see a sign. This landscape is actually available on a template. We have them on our website, but you also can just go take a look at the garden and pull them from these kind of realtor signs that we put up. So it's a great plug and play option. If you like what you see here, go there, grab the plan, go to the store, buy the plants, and you've got a great drought resistant landscape that only needs to be watered once a week. So here we are in, I would say this is April. Normally that yellow plant, which is basket of gold, is one of our first blooming things at the garden. This year, all of our plants are super late. So I don't think it's even bloomed yet. That's how late things are right now. But so here we are in April, and you can see just a little bit of greenery in the buffalo grass. But that's one thing about warm season grasses is they save you a lot of water, but they take a while to green up. Here we are in early June or late May. So I just called it early summer, but you can see those irises blooming, and you can start to see the Jupiter's beard blooming right next to the house. And so that tells me it's kind of right in that May to June transition. And look at this yard. Isn't that beautiful? It's nice and green. I would take it by then. And then we go into later summer, and you can see just all the plants really starting to fill out, and still that grass just looks beautiful. Then you get into early fall, September. When we get our first few cold spells, like last year, we got snow in September. And when we get those cold spells, it'll cause the buffalo grass to go dormant or start to go dormant. But this is a beautiful fall color that you see with it. So to me, I love that kind of yellow mauve haze. I think it's beautiful. And I think it plays well with all the other plants in the landscape. And here you can see that Table Mountain ice plant, just by the end of the season, it's exploded and covered the ground. And now we're into October at this point. And so you can see how green your Kentucky bluegrass lawn would still typically be in comparison to your buffalo grass. But it's a great option for a low water landscape if it's not a high traffic. Kentucky bluegrass and back where you have high traffic or your kids or pets play, that's great. But in front, where the only time you walk on to mow it, maybe you can find a better substitute. Here is Sundancer Buffalo. This is in Scott's front yard. It's kind of that first picture I showed you. Amazing. It's a little bit darker green than the Prestige. The Prestige has a little bit more blue-green color, but just an awesome grass. And here it is in one of our volunteers' backyards. So these are local. It's not like I'm taking these pictures from another state. These are all local examples of what it can do. Another grass is blue grama. This is one that you will always seed. With buffalo, you can do seed or plugs. And this seed grows in super fast. So you can see in just 21 days, you already have a lot of greenery covering the ground. And you can choose to mow or not mow this grass. I prefer it unmowed. I think it has a beautiful texture and sway to it. So that's my preference. And as I mentioned earlier, these take a while to green up. So something that we did is we actually installed these little pink allium blooms. You can see it to the left of the sign in the picture on the left. We installed these bulbs in the grass area, used them as kind of an additional planting bed. And I think the concept is great. This is a house that's actually on Kissing Camels. And this grass area used to be Kentucky bluegrass, and it was completely converted to blue grama. And here you can see where the house actually backs up to the golf course. And the blue grama does a great job. It looks wonderful. The yard next door is Kentucky bluegrass. So you can see it's a little bit more green. But I would take this for 60% water savings and less maintenance. And here's a close-up shot of that grass. So just a really terrific solution. So when it comes to low water plant choices, go to our website. Click that filter. There are lots of things to choose from. Here are some trees. I won't go over them, but you do have some great blooming options, some crab apples, some golden rain tree. Here are some wonderful shrubs. I just talked through a few, but there's a lot of options when you go to low water. And your perennials, oh, there's more than you can put in your landscape. So there's a lot of options there as well. And lastly, there's a lot of additional benefits that happen. We've talked about this throughout the presentation, but when you're using native plants, you're actually recreating some natural habitat. I think of landscapes as they are now as almost a food desert for our native pollinators and wildlife. The plants we're putting in those landscapes don't really support them, and so there's these barren areas where they really can't find what they need to survive. So by using some of these plants, you're also creating this additional benefit of really helping and attracting those pollinators and wildlife to your landscape. One last compare and contrast. So Scott's front yard is on the right, and you can see this wonderful, still green lawn, Sundancer buffalo grass with more drought resistant plants around it. The picture on the left was my backyard at my old house. And that backyard, if we were to enter a time of restriction, you would see it. My grass wouldn't be doing as good. Those plants around my grass wouldn't be doing as good. And that is planned to happen with where we live. So you can still have a beautiful landscape that is drought resistant. And we do have additional sources. Let's go over. Our demonstration gardens are amazing. We have one at Mesa Road and one at Cottonwood Creek. And then we have a wonderful plant database. And by the way, a lot of the pictures I've shown you are actually part of the landscape gallery that you see right there. So you can find plants, you can find inspiration through pictures. It's a great place to go check out. I would definitely say come on over to the garden and take a look at our waterwiseplants.org database. All right, everyone, have a great evening.